Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, November 18th. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the bloody massacre this morning at a Jerusalem synagogue. At this hour, funerals are taking place for the 4 fatalities at the Harndorf synagogue, in which 2 Palestinian terrorists, armed with an axe, knives, and a gun, stormed into the house of worship during morning prayers. 3 of the 4 victims held dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship, and the 4th was born in Great Britain. The first funeral today was for Rabbi Moshe Twersky, the 59-year-old dean of the English-speaking Torat Moshe Yeshiva, who was buried a short while ago at the Givat Shaul Cemetery in the capital. Twersky was the elder son of the renowned rabbi and author Yitzchak Twersky of Boston, and a grandson of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, the principal philosopher of the modern Orthodox movement. He is survived by his wife Miriam and their 5 children. Rabbi Abraham Goldberg, 68, was born in Britain and made Aliyah in 1991. He was an educational advisor in the Haredi community. He is survived by his wife and 6 children. Rabbi Kalman Zev Levine, 55, was born in the United States. He is survived by 10 children. Rabbi Aryeh Kupinski, 43, was also a U.S. citizen. He leaves behind 5 children. In the wake of this morning's attack, police called on the public to remain alert and vigilant, promising that all steps will be taken to enhance public security. IBA's Margaret Dudkevich reports on the day's events.
Terror once again struck the heart of Jerusalem. This morning, 4 Jewish worshippers were killed and 8 others injured after 2 terrorists wielding an axe, knives and a gun entered a Jerusalem synagogue and attacked them. 8 others were injured, including 2 police officers who shot and killed the terrorists. Security officials described the attack as the most deadliest in the capital in 6 years. The terrorists were identified as cousins, 27-year-old Rassan and 22-year-old Uday Abu Jamal of Jabal Mukaber in East Jerusalem. One of them worked in a grocery store near the site of the attack. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine claim responsibility for the attack. Hamas and Islamic Jihad praise the attack, calling it heroic. While the Defense and Security Establishment convened to assess the security situation, roadblocks were set up around East Jerusalem neighborhoods. In Jabal Mukaber, security forces searched the homes of the 2 terrorists and detained a number of family members for questioning to determine if they were involved. Family members said they were proud of the attack, saying it was carried out in response to Israel's violations on the Temple Mount and the death of the Israeli Arab bus driver yesterday, who Israel said committed suicide, and his family claims he was murdered by Israeli settlers. Clashes erupted in the neighborhood, with Palestinians throwing stones at Israeli security forces. It started out like any other morning, with Harnof residents walking to synagogues in the neighborhood. Prayers were interrupted in the Kiryat Yaakov synagogue when 2 terrorists brandishing knives, an axe and a gun stormed into the building and began attacking the worshippers. Screams penetrated the air as the terrorists struck down the worshippers, some covered in their prayer shawls with tefillin on their arms. 2 police officers engaged in a gun battle with the terrorists while alerting security forces. Emergency forces who arrived at the site were greeted with a horrific scene.
We came down from the top of the street, and we heard some of the sirens of ambulances and police coming. We walked down and we heard there was a terrorist came into the shul here, and with a knife and started to stab people. The police came after a few seconds, after a few minutes, and they were killed.
We came to pray this morning. We were coming into the synagogue, and we heard gunshots from downstairs, and heard 1 shot, 2 shots, and then a flurry of shots, at least 5 or 6 or 7 shots. We all ran out. We understand that somebody was killed or seriously wounded downstairs. And everybody called the police, and they came about 10 minutes later. And that's all I can tell you.
Police Commissioner Yochanan Danino, Public Security Minister Yitzhak Aharonovich attempted to quell the public's fears. 2 terrorists butchered and murdered Jewish worshippers. It was a massacre, Aharonovich said. He called on the public to remain vigilant and alert, saying while he cannot guarantee there'll be no further attacks, police and the security forces will take all the necessary steps in order to restore calm to Jerusalem. Margaret Dudkevich, IBA News.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon held an emergency meeting with the heads of all the security agencies following the attack. Netanyahu blamed Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas for the massacre, which U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said was a result of Palestinian calls for a day of rage. Here with more is IBA's diplomatic correspondent Eli Wogelenter.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said in a statement this morning that the attack is the direct result of the incitement led by Hamas and Abu Mazen, incitement that the international community irresponsibly ignores. We will respond with a strong hand to the cruel murder of Jews who came to pray and were caught by dark murderous hands. Directly after the attack, Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon convened his own meeting of IDF brass. Ya'alon vowed that Israel will chase down the perpetrators and those who sent them everywhere and in every way within the borders of Israel and outside. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman said Abbas has turned the conflict into a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims and a systematic incitement that he leads against Jews, whom he defines as impure, who are not allowed to enter the Temple Mount, is instructions to carry out nasty attacks like this. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called the assault pure terror and demanded that Palestinian leaders also condemn the attack, saying to have this kind of act, which is a pure result of incitement, of calls for days of rage, of just irresponsibility, is unacceptable. Kerry noted that Israel had acted to calm the situation by easing age restrictions on Muslim worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but he did not mention any steps taken by the Palestinians, despite what had been described after the meeting in Amman as a pledge from Abbas to rein in incitement.
This morning, today, in Jerusalem, Palestinians attacked Jews who were praying in a synagogue. People who had come to worship God in the sanctuary of the synagogue were hatcheted and hacked and murdered in that holy place in an act of pure terror and senseless brutality and murder. I call on the Palestinian leadership at every single level to condemn this in the most powerful terms. This violence has no place anywhere. So the Palestinian leadership must condemn this, and they must begin to take serious steps to restrain any kind of incitement that comes from their language, from other people's language, and exhibit the kind of leadership that is necessary to put this region on a different path. Our hearts go out to all Israelis for the atrocity of this event and for all the reminders of history that come with it. This is simply has no place in human behavior, and we need to hear from leaders who are going to lead their people to a different place.
Abbas did issue a qualified condemnation, saying in a statement that the Palestinian presidency has always condemned the killing of civilians on either side and condemns today the killing of worshippers at a synagogue in West Jerusalem. But the statement also included a qualifier. We also condemn violence, no matter what the reasons behind it, and call to stop interference at Al-Aqsa and the incitement by Israeli ministers. Kerry later spoke with Abbas and expressed support for his statement. Economy Minister Naftali Bennett of Bayit Yehudi also blamed Abbas for the attack.
Here is a deliberate initiative of Abu Mazen to boil the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. So he's been inciting, he's been calling on people to use acts of violence, and now we're seeing the results. What Israel is going to do now is crack down on the source of terror and on the source of incitement. We have to stop both the infrastructure of terror and stop that incitement that causes two Palestinians to wake up in the morning and kill Jews. We know that terror attacks are being initiated. We'll get to them. We're going to get to the head of these groups, and we're also going to enforce on Abu Mazen more pressure in order to stop this deliberate incitement.
Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein echoed Bennett in blaming PA incitement for the attack and implied that Israel should cut ties with the Palestinians. Israel should not be dealing with those whose way is to slaughter innocents in our holy places, he said. And Shas MK Eli Yishai, who lives in Har Nof, called on security forces to treat the situation in Jerusalem like a war, emphasizing that this is a war inside of Israel for its very existence. Ari?
Thank you, Eli. Palestinians celebrated in the streets of Gaza today following the attack. Children joined in the rally, carrying posters of the pictures of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, while others held up pictures of the 2 terrorists who carried out the massacre. Masked men distributed sweets, while Palestinian radio described the attackers as martyrs. Well, joining me now in the studio to fill us in is the Prime Minister's spokesman, Mark Regev. Mark, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Mark, what can you tell us about the options being discussed now when the Prime Minister says he's going to react with a heavy hand? What does he mean by that?
Well, obviously, what happened today was a brutal massacre of innocent people. And what's interesting is the same weapons, these sort of butcher knives, used by these terrorists, used by ISIS in Iraq and Syria when they cut off the heads of innocent civilians. It shows something. It shows that this is not about Israelis and Palestinians. This is a larger phenomenon against radical extreme Islam like ISIS, like Hamas, like Iran, like Islamic Jihad. And here we see a divide between countries like Israel, Egypt, Jordan, other moderate Arab states, and extremists. And the Palestinian Authority appears to be coming down on the wrong side of this divide. Instead of unequivocally condemning this sort of murder, this massacre, President Abbas and the Palestinian government has actually been inciting, encouraging, fueling the flames of violence. This is unacceptable, and we have to demand a change.
Well, Mark, you're putting a picture of the Palestinian terrorists, equating them with ISIS, but what is the heavy hand that the government's going to take now?
Well, obviously, we'll do what is needed to protect our people. As we speak, we have beefed up the police and security presence in Jerusalem to safeguard all the city's residents. We are working with the intelligence community to weed out these people, to take action against them. But the most important thing is to stop this incitement, this hatred, fueling a climate of hatred and violence that is not just, unfortunately, coming from the Islamists, from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, it's also coming from the Palestinian Authority. You know, there's a Western Hollywood saying, a white man speaks with forked tongue. We all grew up with that. It applies today to the PA. Under enormous international pressure, President Abbas condemns today's atrocity. He does so, of course, not unequivocally. He, as you reported, he qualifies his condemnation highly. He nevertheless does so, but at the same time, in Arabic, the spokespeople of Fatah, his own political movement, the movement that he's chairman of, justify and praise this massacre. It's time for President Abbas, who claims to be a partner in peace, who claims to be moderate, it's time for him to disassociate himself totally from these extremists, from Hamas, from ISIS, from these radicals. It's time that he decided and proved that he was really a partner in peace.
Now, Secretary Kerry called for and received the condemnation by Abbas, and he seemed to accept that, satisfied. Are you satisfied with it?
Well, it's better than nothing. But the truth is, what was President Abbas doing in the last few days? You know, we met in Jordan. I traveled with the Prime Minister to the capital, Amman. We had a meeting with with Secretary of State Kerry and with the King of Jordan, Abdallah. The whole point of that meeting was to try to calm things down. The Prime Minister spoke very strongly about the Temple Mount, that we won't allow a change in the status quo, and that was accepted and welcomed by Arab and other leaders around the world. What did President Abbas do immediately following? He called for the Palestinian Authority, called for a day of rage. So our calls for de-escalation, for calming things down, have been met by PA demands for more and more violence. They have to change their path, and in the interim, we will act to protect our people.
Now, it's clear that the Prime Minister did take steps to calm the situation on the Israeli side, but looking at your Prime Minister right now, the coalition is cracking up. There's peace process is dead. The Israelis and Arabs are rioting against each other. Where is the government going? And is Netanyahu just trying to survive here, or where are they going?
No. Days like today are not a day for petty politics. A day like today, we want to see national unity, and the Prime Minister has called for national unity. These killers, these extremists who walk into a synagogue and just butcher innocent worshippers, they don't care which political party they vote for. They want to kill Israelis. They want to kill Jews. And I think that should remind us all where we are, what region we're living in and put our own internal differences into perspective. We have to overcome these extremists. It's not just a threat facing Israel. As we've seen, manifestations of this sort of extremism in Iraq, in Syria, with the beheading of innocent people. We see it in Libya, we see it in Yemen, we see it in Iran. This is not just Israel's fight, this is humanity's fight against these hardcore extremists who basically want to return us to some sort of primitive medievalism. We have to fight them and we have to prevail.
Well, Mark Regev, the spokesman for the Prime Minister, thanks for joining us. It's a horrific day, and thank you for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Condemnations of the synagogue massacre have been coming in from around the world, including from Turkey, whose foreign minister said Ankara is against every kind of attack against holy places, which is wrong, just as Turkey previously condemned Israeli attacks against the Al-Aqsa Mosque. European Union Policy Chief Federica Mogherini called the attack condemnable by all means. While in London, British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond called on everyone to take steps towards reducing the violence.
Both sides in this conflict need to do everything possible to de-escalate the situation, reduce the tension that we've seen over the past few weeks in Jerusalem, which is extremely dangerous for both Palestinian and Jewish communities in that area.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Middle East expert Yoram Ettinger. Thanks for joining us, Yoram.
Thank you.
Well, you've just heard Mark Regev, and will the course of action that the government's planning now make a difference?
Well, it will make a difference if the government will shift gears from defense to offense. When you defend, you simply invite the enemies to score more and more points against you. It's time for the government to stop focusing on defending the people, but rather, or instead, attacking the terrorists. Moreover, it's time to shift gears from the symptoms, namely the individual or group terrorist, into the cause. The cause happens to be the ideology behind it, which is nourished, indoctrinated day after day in Mahmoud Abbas' schools system from K through 12, mosques and state-controlled media. There's no point of chasing the individual mosquitoes. It's time to drain the educational swamp of the Palestinian Authority.
Now, Mark Regev mentioned specifically the incitement going on. That's so they want to attack that offensively. But what would you do besides going after calling for the end of incitement? What else could be done?
Well, not calling. As I said, it's time to attack. The two terrorists came from a very particular neighborhood known to be extremely violent, both militarily as well as ideologically. It's time to clean that swamp. And you clean that swamp by imposing a curfew, and the curfew should last as long as the place is clear of all lethal elements. The same thing should be done in every single location which is suspect and proven to be a source of terrorism. But mostly also it calls for enhanced U.S.-Israel cooperation in draining the educational swamp. The U.S. funds the Palestinian Authority to the tune of $400 million every single year, which bankrolls incitement, bankrolls hate education against Jews, against the U.S., against Israel. It's a system which also dooms the Palestinians, majority of whom are not terrorists, to persist living under an oppressive, corrupt terrorist regime. Congress should suspend the funding of that authority. Funding hate education on one hand and American core values on the other hand are oxymoron. Moreover, running educational system which is hate education on one hand and claiming to be partners for peace, again, is an egregious oxymoron.
Now, Ambassador Ettinger, you know that Israel's under a microscope, and these actions that you mentioned, such as curfew in sections of Jerusalem, do you think the United States, especially Secretary Kerry, understand the situation that Israel existed right now?
Well, this is secondary or tertiary element. The U.S. did not understand Prime Minister Begin when he went ahead and bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. They did not understand us. They punished us with a military embargo, and thank God he did that, because government and people should be ready to pay in the short run in order to advance long-term interests. The danger to the survival of Israel is when a government prefers short-term convenience over long-term conviction.
Well, Ambassador, one more question very quickly. Secretary Kerry seems to be satisfied with Abbas's statement of condemnation, and yet Israel isn't. What can be done to bridge that sort of gap between our understanding and the Americans' understanding?
Well, it seems to me that Secretary Kerry, just like President Obama, are determined to persist in their ideology and policy irrespective of reality. This has been going on for the last 6 years. Israel should turn more and more towards Congress, and not only because there is a new majority in the Senate, because most Democrats, just like most Republicans, understand the Israeli side. And therefore, we should appeal first and foremost to the American constituents and then to American legislators to put an end to this farcical reality of American taxpayer funding hate education system run by Mahmoud Abbas, which indoctrinates and manufactures lines of terrorists in this part of the world.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Ambassador Entiker, for joining us. Finally, taking a look at the local market, where the shekel today lost strength against all major foreign currencies, and share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange also took a downward turn. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. Turning to the weather, and the forecast is for partly cloudy skies with an increase in temperatures, and it will be hotter than normal this time of year along the coast. Here's a look at the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's all for our broadcast this evening. Erin Viner will be at this desk tomorrow to bring you the latest news from Israel. Please join her. Till then, I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan wishing you a shalom from Jerusalem.